Okay, great. Looks like we're recording. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen. Let's see how that goes. I just have a couple of placeholder slides, so I'm not doing a presentation, but I figured I would go ahead and just have a couple of placeholders just in case something goes wrong. So everybody, welcome to our 2023 Virtual Curators Meeting. I'm sorry we can't be in person, but I'm excited to see you all next year. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Alex Hengstifer. I manage our geological collections here at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So in terms of our agenda, nobody seemed to have any issues with the timing. So if we move along quicker than we expected, that's fine. We can have extra time at the end for open conversation or just go ahead and wrap up. So hopefully nobody seemed to be too concerned about the amount of time, but we'll just do the best that we can. Okay, so I want to just go ahead. If everybody, I'll kind of go down my list of who I see. If you'll just introduce yourself and where you're at and what your role is, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our presentations. So the first person I see is Michelle.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Pencrott. I'm the curator at the IUDP Gulf Coast Repository.
Okay, great, thank you. Next I have Danielle. Oh, and you're still muted. I'm still having trouble hearing you.
Hi, my name is Danielle Cares, and I am the curator at the Graduate School of Oceanography Repository in Narragansett, Rhode Island.
Awesome, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad everybody could be here. We have some new faces, so it's always exciting. Next, we have Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Annis. I'm the curator at Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory.
Awesome, great to see you. Next, I have Jamie.
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Jamie Sutz. I'm the assistant director here at the Polar Rock Repository at Polar Center in Ohio State University. Nice to be here.
Great, welcome. Yeah, welcome to the group. It's great to have you. Next, I have Brian, Bucky, as we affectionately like to call you.
Call me whatever you want. This is Brian Bukowski. I'm the curator of the USGS repository in Woods Hole, Massachusetts.
Awesome, welcome. Next I have Kurt.
Hi, my name is Kurt LeBombard. I'm the curator at the National Science Foundation Ice Core facility located here in Denver, Colorado.
Awesome, welcome. We will have you up next. And next I have on my list Mike Howe.
Yeah, I'm Mike Howe, Chief Curator at the British Geological Survey, and I'm responsible not only for core, but also the collections that were on display in the Museum of Practical Geology, as you can probably see behind me.
Oh, excellent. Welcome. It's great to have you. Next, I've got Clint.
Hey everybody, I'm not orange or red. I think I cheap camera, but Clint Edgerton. I am the Marine Geology Data Manager with NOAA NCI.
Great, glad you can be here, Clint, and I got your presentation, so thank you for that. Next, I have Susie.
Hi, I'm Susie McLaughlin. I'm the curator at the British Ocean Sediment Core Research Facility in Southampton in the UK.
Great, welcome. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for joining us, even though you're in a much different time zone. And next I have Maisie.
Hi, I'm Maisie Chesaby. I'm one of the curators at the Oregon State University Marine and Geology Repository.
Great, welcome, glad you can join us. Next I have Brady.
Hi, I'm Christina Brady Shannon. I'm the curator at the Continental Scientific Drilling Facility at the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis.
Great, welcome, and we will be at your repository next year, which we all look forward to. And then next I have Val.
Hi everybody, I'm Val Stanley. I am one of the other curators at the Oregon State University's Marine and Geology Repository in Corvallis, Oregon.
Great, welcome. And next we have Anne.
Yeah, hi, my name's Ann Gruno. I'm the director of the Polar Rock Repository at Ohio State University.
Great to see you, Anne. Next I have Sable. So the rest of you don't have your camera on, so if you choose not to, that's totally fine, but I will go through those as well in case you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sabiel Choi. Sorry about the noise. I'm outside. I am the Caesar and EarthChem Library Data Curator. And Kirsten, I believe, will be joining us later today.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I know that she's at a meeting out here in LA, but she said she should be able to join us. But I really appreciate you being here as well. So next on my list, I have Adam.
Hi, my name is Adam Manser. I'm the data manager at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History's Mineral Sciences Collections.
Great to have you. And I'll follow that up with Leslie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Hale. I'm the team lead collection manager in mineral sciences at the Smithsonian.
Welcome. Great to have you. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Next I have Jeffrey.
Hi, I'm Jeff Waldner. I'm with Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Marine Minerals Division, and we collect a lot of geological and geophysical data, and we look to see how we can share that data.
Great, awesome. It's great to have you. So welcome. Next on my list, I have Brianna.
Hi, my name's Brianna. I work for the USGS St. Petersburg Coastal Marine Science Center, and I'm the Center Samples Database Manager.
Awesome, welcome, great to have you. Next I've got Jim Browning.
Yeah, hi, my name is Jim Browning. I am the curator of the Rutgers IODP repository at Rutgers University.
Awesome, great to have you.
Thank you.
So last two, we have Shannon.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I'm Shannon Cofield. I actually work with Jeff Waldner at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in the Marine Minerals Division, and I am a geological oceanographer of many trades, but we are your friendly federal employee representatives. Thanks.
Oh, it's great to have you guys. So thank you so much for being here. And finally, on my list, I have Jesse.
Oh, hey, yeah, I am Jesse. I assume it's me. I work with Michelle in IODP.
Perfect, welcome, great to have you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, well, we have familiar faces, new faces. So welcome to the group. This is my favorite group that I work with. So happy to see you all. Okay, so I think we're doing pretty good on time. So with that, we're going to move on to Kurt is going to go first with the repository update. And I believe I enabled share screen. So if you want to try and share, Kurt, that would be great.
Okay. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, that's interesting. Why? I'm not sure why it's doing that. Start share. Maybe I'm going to the wrong place. I've been doing Zoom for years and now I think I'm forgetting how to do that. I'm going next to share screen and I have enabled one participant can share at a time. Advanced sharing options. One participant who can share. Here we go. There it is. Who can start sharing. Okay. So let's try that again. Is it?
Yeah, yep. I just gotta.
Okay, great. Sorry.
Toggle a couple things on my end.
Always some technical glitch.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go into mute and we'll let you take it from there. I'm going to hop into the notes and start taking notes and adding our list of participants as well. So,
okay. Can folks see my screen now or?
Not yet.
No. Sure.
Is your presentation on Google Slides or is it?
It's on a PowerPoint. Let's see. Reopen. About now?
No, not yet. I'm not sure. Does somebody else want to try to share their screen just to see if it'll, oh, there it goes.
Hey,
Nice.
there we go.
Okay, great. All yours.
Great. Okay. Is everybody seeing the full screen of my presentation?
We see the presentation one
Perfect.
with your slides and everything.
Okay. Okay, my name is Kurt LeBombard. I'm the curator here at the Ice Core Lab. Many of the things I'm going to cover today, no one else finds interesting. So this is my group of people to share it with, which is very exciting. The big thing is within the next 3 years, we'll be moving our entire facility 600 feet. So might as well be 600 miles because everything has to move. So we are going to hopefully award, or the government is going to award the contract at the end of this year, and we'll start construction hopefully in January of 2024. So in the meantime, we still need to keep the lights on and keep our processes and activities going forward with our facility slowly falling apart. Which is not good in the ice core world. So I am literally like changing lights, trying to keep fans and motors running until we can bridge ourselves to the new facility, which will hopefully be 2026. So we're targeting April of 2026 for all of our transition. We're going to do about a 6 to 8 months of testing for our new facility, and then we're going to move roughly 1 million pounds of ice to the new facility. So I should have a little bit more of an update the middle of next year as far as if this timeline holds, but we are now seeing an increased amount of ice coming to our facility just because there's a backlog from the pandemic. People are back to drilling. There's a lot of projects happening in Greenland because the logistics in Antarctica are slowly not being funded as aggressively as they had been because they're trying to rebuild stations, fund research vessels, a lot of things like that. So to that end, we'll have a little bit more of an update in next year. So this was the last slide I had last year, which was kind of good for me to go back and kind of see where I ended up in the past year. We completed a couple things, got new ice core boxes, updated our sample shipment boxes, and then basically put together a hyperspectral camera system to replace an old imaging system. So we did all that in the past year. So we have now a Spectrum hyperspectral camera set up in the freezer that's cold hardened to -26 centigrade, so we can start to process ice in the future. We're not going to go back and process, but be able to look at it through the camera. And so the University of Maine and Coldex out of Oregon have funding for this to start looking at ice with the hyperspectral camera to be able to kind of do a nice hyperspectral analysis. We have brand new ice core boxes that have handles. So that may seem novel, but for the past 35 years, we've had ice core boxes without handles. So an incalculable amount of injuries manipulating 150-pound boxes will be a thing of the past. We're going to be updating our database from FileMaker to an open source database hosted on the USGS server. I feel this is going to take us quite a bit of time, but towards the end of this presentation or throughout today, if folks have any insight of how to do that or any tips, we're definitely kind of in the early stages of what that might look like. Current website is hosted at UNH with a link to our controlled version of our database. So it works. It doesn't work as well as it probably should, but it's functional. So this is probably about a year project. Been doing a lot of cleaning. And so this kind of ties in with the move and thinking about inventory. So when I took this job about a year and a half ago, it was a mystery as to what was in the back of our main storage. So our science management office from UNH came out. We went through about 200 boxes, labeled them, inventoried them, and try to figure out what we're going to do with them because we don't have the floor space to just randomly put pallets in our new freezer. So it's kind of an ongoing 2-year project, but it was an eye-opener for what the previous curator had collected. So I'll just leave it at that. And I think no one else would appreciate this photograph, but it is like a significant amount of work just to organize and label everything at -40. I definitely did not realize how much of a task that would be. And so one of the things that came about from our need to inventory what we had is come up with a philosophy for how we're going to approach return samples, cores, and other materials. And so we met with the curator of geology at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Dr. James Hagedorn. We have a collaborative agreement with for bringing his students in, and we go there often to see how he approaches collections management. But it was an eye-opener of him explaining how they approach their collection. So I won't go through all of this, but at the end of the day, he was basically telling us you kind of need to be ruthless in how you manage your collections because you are very limited on time and space. And then they gave us some criteria of things to look at, but also the more important thing is we kind of cross-referenced it with how the Smithsonian approaches or the Smithsonian's philosophy of curation, and then also how we apply that to ice, because it's really easy to get rid of ice and they'll never recover it. So you need to really be thinking about if you put something in the parking lot or you dispose of it somehow, make sure that's really what you want to do. So we have a kind of hierarchy of things that we go through now when we're getting rid of stuff. And so one of the things that really, I think over the year and a half, it's really dawned on me how different the ice is that we collect or have in our working collection. So this is an example of the basal ice from the bottom of a Denali ice core. That was a collaborative agreement between a couple different universities and the National Park Service. So this is it. This is the only ice core we're getting from Denali. And this is 9,000 to 13,000 years before present. So really, like, it's kind of a cool, really significant piece of ice, because if you think about like what was happening in Alaska 9,000 to 13,000 years ago. And so, you know, it gives you that context. And granted, it's not the deep time of a lot of the collections that you all manage, but, you know, it's a good reference point for us to make sure that we're making good decisions in our collections. So the collections guidelines helps us kind of think towards the new facility as far as what we're going to move, how we're going to move it, the need to be cautious in that. It also ties in with how we think about catastrophe planning. When we went through the exercise of catastrophe planning probably over the last year, our primary and secondary catastrophe plans are basically having 4 different alarms and an aggressive maintenance schedule with ample spare parts to come up with any kind of solution we need to repair the facility. The caveat is if we lose the structure of the facility, if there's a helicopter crash into the facility because we have a hospital right next to us that's flying patients over our building, which I don't particularly care for, but so we're thinking about like, what are the things that could go tragically wrong? And when we did the math and we contacted a bunch of folks in Denver for support of what we could do, we came to the realization that we could only save about 10% of our collection, or about 2,500 meters of ice. So that's not a lot. So we're in the process of trying to prioritize that ice, what is the most valued part of the collection, and then start thinking about how we move that ice, and then reorganize it in such a way that we better prioritize it in the freezer if we ever do have to move it rapidly. So those are kind of the things that we're thinking through as we think about our move and catastrophe plans. And yeah, basically, this is a piece of 2 to 4 million year old ice from the Coldex project from Allen Hills. So you can see a really interesting bubble striation, and also elongated bubbles in some kind of orientation or flow pattern that we're still not sure of. So again, it's all about the collection, making sure what we have is stored correctly, accessible, and there for when I'm not curator. So that's all I have.
Okay, great. So do we have any questions for Kurt? And you can go ahead and just unmute.
Hey, Kurt, I have something real quick. We have some folks here at IODP working on a hyperspectral camera imaging system for sediment cores and rock cores. Is it okay if I pass your contact info along to that team?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. They're in progress of building something out right now.
Yeah, we learned quite a bit on how to fabricate it so it would work well in the freezer, but there's a lot of little tips and tricks on how to make anything of that system work better.
Yeah, seems tricky. So thanks.
You bet.
Yeah, Kurt, Tammy here at the Rock Repository. Just I'll flag it for later. I'll mention it on my slides, but we're going through a website revamp as well with the database, and we'll be calling out looking for folks interested to join us. So feel free to use our website and see if you can see yourself in there. And we can talk later, but yeah, just to flag that.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think that we moved our facility when I first came on board within both the dredge rock and the core collection, but we were able to let things sit in a parking lot for quite some time. So it's more of a comment. I don't envy the moving of the ice cores. But do you have I guess one question, do you have funding for a team of people, or do you use students, or how are you?
Yeah, oops, am I still? Yeah, so it's probably going to be a combination. We've had a couple organizations and institutions in the Front Range here in Denver, potentially volunteer, because there's a lot of ice core science that happens. So I think we'll have an ample amount of people. It's just, it'll be the sequence, like anything, of like what you move, how you move it, and making sure you're just not moving things that don't really need to be moved. So that's why we're trying to pare down a couple things, but we do have funding, NSF funding for that. So we'll probably have a core group of people helping with us, and then volunteers or other folks interested in helping us be successful.
Okay, great. No, that's great. More hands is always very helpful. And yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, just a quick comment. One of our sister institutes, the British Antarctic Survey, certainly in the past stored their ice cores in commercial storage. And due to UK government regulations, they had to tender on a regular basis. And that meant from time to time, they were shipping their ice cores to different commercial core stores. So it might be worth having a quick chat with the British Antarctic Survey, because I think they've got quite a lot of experience in moving core stores.
I'd love to hear from them. Yeah, that would be fantastic to get a contact or reach out to them. I knew the Australians store their ice cores in a fish market, so I think we're doing a little bit better, but any information we can get, we'll take.
Well, the last I heard, they were in a McCain's chip freezer store. But I'll try and put you in touch. I'll make contact with my contact to put you in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Great questions. Thanks for the presentation, Kurt. You guys have been doing a lot in the last year. I feel like you were all just here last month, so nice work. Okay, so let's move on. Next up is Clint and the folks from NOAA and CEI. So we're going to get an update on the indexed marine and lacustrine geological samples. And sorry, I think I'm gonna go into mute for just a second. I think my gardeners are here, so I'm gonna close up. Clint, let me know if you have any issues sharing. If not, I will share. So I will be able to hear you.
Sure. Thanks, Alex. Just give me a second. Let me
Sure.
figure this out. Okay, can y'all see my screen?
It is getting there. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, all right. And can you see this Excel document?
Right now I'm just seeing your Google Slides.
We'll come to that. I'll come to that later. I'll stick with the slides for now. Okay, I just put it in presentation mode. Everything's still good?
Yep, looks great.
Okay, all right. All right, thanks again, Alex. Again, my name is Clint Edgerton, the Marine Geology Data Manager with NOAA NCI. I don't believe Kelly was able to join today. Kelly's in a leadership meeting that she couldn't get out of, but NCI Marine Geology falls within the section that Kelly leads. Also joining me is Chris Slater. He's the lead software engineer out in Boulder, Colorado with NCI. And I'm not sure John Cartwright made it on yet, but if he does, John is the geospatial systems architect, and both Chris and John, as well as a person named Peyton, help out with the maintain the infrastructure with IMLGS. So I thought I'd inject a little humor into my talk, and because I know there's several people on this call that I've said more than once, we're almost there. You know, there's more than one data set in the backlog, and I think I've come to sound like a broken record, and so I don't want to really say that again. But I'll break that because I believe we truly are almost there. What I say here won't make any that much sense, but like the database and is in production. And there's movement on the ticket for the API to move into production. So everything is really moving. We really are almost there. But I will say, since we last met, we've sorry, my phone's blowing up, but we've made 3 separate updates to the database, including a complete refactoring, as well as the ingest pipeline, user interface, and the API. And in parallel with that, we've had 3 separate updates. One is actually ongoing now. 3 separate updates to the web application. So bear with us, and it's frustrating for me, but we truly are almost there, and we are putting a lot of investment into the IMLGS. It's something that we look forward to maintaining on behalf of everyone. Hoping this continues to flourish. The IMLGS component. So it's a quick update on what has been going on, particularly with the database, the ingest pipeline, and the API. A lot of that is behind the curtain, so to speak. And you and the public don't really get to see the things that have been done. You get to see the product, of course, but there has been a lot of work, things that allow me to link to to data sources, to associated data, things QA QC through the ingest process that of course makes it easier, but also makes the whole system more efficient, more productive. I can find errors in the process relatively quickly, and then communicate with the curator, and we can solve those issues quickly. That's the intent. And we've also when we modernize the database, we also modernize the API. And so a lot of work there. And in parallel, we've built out the new API data submission option, and there's more on that a little later. That was a big one within the community. And and there are some things, of course, you will see. It'll be obviously is first is the new database will accept the new IGSNs up to 32 characters in length. We can allow samples with more than one geological age. So as an example, a dredge sample, you may not break it out by individual rocks, individual components. So there could be more than one geological age. We actually have a data submission in the backlog because we could not ingest that. It had more than one geological age associated with it. We've updated that to allow for more than one geological age. We also allow for we now allow for samples with only year as opposed to the year, month, date. Of course, this is I don't have to tell this group, but that's not something we encourage. More information the better. But there may be cases. I see Adam is on the call. Like Smithsonian, they had a lot of old samples. They may only know the year or month or even the year, and so so we've updated this to allow for such things in the future. And so with that, I'll stop and welcome, turn it over to Chris Slater for a few minutes. And Chris is going to give a live demo of the work that he and his team have done with the API data submission option. So I'll stop sharing. And oops. Am I still sharing?
Nope. Chris should be good to share.
Yep, I'm here. Thank you, Clint. Let me, I'm just trying to figure out the share option here. Sorry, my computer's asking me for permission to share. Hold on just a second here. I might need to jump off and jump on real quick here because I have to apparently quit Zoom in order to give it permission. So I'll be right back.
Sure, we'll be here.
Okay, well, I can fill in, try to fill in some blank time, but so what else can I say about the
Actually, Clint, this is Kirsten. I have a question, quick question. You mentioned that you've made changes to accommodate IGSNs up to 32 characters. You probably, I mean, we talked about it before that the IGSN has changed syntax, right? And the entire structure and is now like a DOI. Are you talking about 32 characters of the suffix in the IGSN, or is it the entire URL that is, or DOI that including the handle prefix and so on that can be accommodated?
the entire,
back.
I believe.
Now let's see. Yeah, now I can share.
Kirsten, you want, we can talk about that again.
Okay, sure.
A second. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
I apologize. Okay. So yeah, as Clint said, my team has been working on creating an API to allow for programmatic submissions to the IMLGS. So I'm gonna give a quick demo of how that workflow is gonna work. And this is in a pre-production version of the IMLGS application. But this is, as Clint said, in the works to be deployed to production within NCI. So first, I'm going to kind of show a data manager's kind of point of view of this. So a data manager has some more permissions than a data submitter. So let me log in as a data manager here. So a data manager can add new users to the system. So I've already set up a user, but I'm going to go ahead and show kind of what that looks like. Let's see here, if I remember where this is here. Administration, there it is, users. So I created a user named Willie, and he's going to have a role of data provider. And you can associate a user with a facility. So I just picked AOML, did that just at random. So I have no preference as to what amongst data providers here. So let's just say that AML wants to submit some data to us. So they'll go ahead and log in the system here. I'm just going to point out, I'm using the web browser for this. You don't have to use it. And that's actually where the real power of this API comes from. But it's a nice tool to demonstrate how this all works. Oops. All right, so we'll log in as Willie. And let's just say we want to submit a new cruise and some data with that. So the user can come here, say, let's add a new cruise. We're going to call this test 2. And let's just say this what happened in 2022. You can associate some platforms with it. And then in the user interface, you do have some drop downs. So I'll just say the Icona. And yeah, let's add a leg. Let's just, so we'll do a leg to the cruise. And you can go ahead and submit that. Oops, what did I do wrong? Oh, no, that's right. Yep. So there's a pending cruise here for test 2. And now let's go ahead and associate some samples with that cruise. So add a new sample. Let's call this. And that was the Icona. Choose a cruise ID. Pick that again. And we can choose our leg for that. I could choose sampling device. I'm not going to fill out all these. Let's just say that that was at 50. Don't criticize me if I don't know if this is in the middle of nowhere here. Longitude 5. And let's just, I think it's good enough for this demo here. So we created that sample. And let's go ahead and create an interval. And I think that's good enough for this demonstration here. So we went ahead and created a cruise, we created a sample, and we created an interval for that sample. Now I'm going to show you, so that was submitted to NCI. Well, that would be submitted to NCI if this was a production application. So now it's Clint's job to be able to review those submissions and approve them. So this one to here, I'm logged in as the equivalent of Clint's position here. And I can go to cruise here, and let's just
I'm just saying.
search for some pending cruises. And we see that one we submitted is pending. So this cruise here would not be available to the public until it's been approved. So Clint can come in here and say, yeah, that's right. And we can go ahead and approve that. And then we also had submission, a sample that was submitted. So we can go here, search for state pending. And yeah, I think it was this one here. So we're going to go ahead and approve that one. So because there's a question here, a bit concerned that GeoSamples API may be associated with the geosamples.org domain. Well, the actual URL is going to be an NCI URL. So the public one will be ngdc.noaa.gov/geosample. So it's actually just an endpoint within the NOAA domain. So I don't think there's, at least from the URL point of view, there's not going to be any conflict with that domain name. Okay, back to my demo. Okay, so that's pretty much that's a real simple overview of how this process works. Now, using this UI is kind of cumbersome, but that's really not how this was developed to be used. This user interface is driven by a REST API, so that's where the real power of this lives, is the ability to script and programmatically make submissions. And so I'm gonna give a real quick demo of how that can be done through just the raw API. First, I'm going to point out that for this to work, a submitter will need to have an API token and that can be done if they click on their username, and you can click add token and it'll generate one. I already generated one, so I already did that ahead of time. But we'll go ahead and demonstrate that. So what I'm going to do for this sample is, or for this example, is I'm going to make a submission for a sample. So I'm going to be using the Linux curl command to do this, but you can use JSON or whatever your language of choice is to do this if you're doing it programmatically. And you can see that I'm posting to an endpoint. I'm sending in an authentication token, which I mentioned before. And let's go ahead and tweak this a little bit. I already did this, so we'll just do this number 4 there. So I can just go to the terminal here and go ahead and run this. And of course, it doesn't work because it's a demo. Let's see here. Publish invalid type. Invalid IGSN. Okay, let's fix that here. Yeah, it wouldn't be a demo if this wasn't working right. I think I've already done this a couple times, which is the problem. There we go. So that made a submission for a sample. And so we have the ID here. And if I wanted to associate an interval with that, I can do that here. Copy this guy. So we're posting to the interval endpoint here, which is what the difference is. All right, just need to fix one thing. And there we go. So I went ahead and made a submission through the API. And if I were to go back and look at Clint's view of the application, you'll see that there's some pending submissions there. Yeah, one of I don't remember which one it was, but one of those is the new one I just added. So that's kind of all I had planned for this quick demo of how the new submission API is going to work. Is there any questions?
Awesome, Chris.
All right.
Hey, really appreciate it. If you have time, if you don't mind sticking around to the end, there may be some questions at the end of the talk.
Sure, not a problem.
And then before I start sharing my screen, Kirsten, to come back to your question, Chris jumping in saved me, but that's a good point. I mark that down as something we need to include because we don't include the prefix. We didn't before, so we need to do that now. I guess that's the new feature.
Yeah,
so
now that the
mark
change is there, yeah. That's
Okay.
it has to have the prefix because we might have different allocating agents and different yeah, ownership of
Mark that down.
prefixes.
That's good that
just
Chris
to be aware
Chris,
of that.
That's good. And I'll loop back around with Chris, you weren't on when that question came up, but and so we'll probably have to add it to the old sample, the old IGSNs as well. Okay, so let me share my screen. Y'all see my slideshow okay?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. So, okay, so that was all the things, you know, a lot of the database, the ingest pipeline, the API, all the things that go on behind the scene. The web app, this is what curator community and the public see mostly is our web application. I presented the image on the left at the last curators meeting. That was in beta. You know, we have previously, we weren't making all the information that we had in the database out there discoverable. At that point, it was still in beta, but we had, and so that's out there now in the public. We did, and we just changed up a few updates, some touches, like as an example at the top, data information references the sample and not the IMLGS number, and we make reference to the control vocabulary at the bottom. But what we're putting a lot of our effort, in addition to things, the coding and stuff that goes on behind the scenes, you know, for the web app to work with the new API, is that we want to expand the search options on our left side control panel. That's pending what we hope we can get some API updates before the close of this month, and if so, we can hope, you know, work towards expanding that in this round of revisions we're doing now, or round of updates we're doing now. We do have at the bottom, I've circled the IGSN to be able to search on the IGSN. That is, we got, you know, we've checked that one box. We've added that. That's in beta right now, so you can't see that. But we hope to be able to, you know, because at the end of the day, that's what the user wants to be able to search on, like lithology or mineralogy, the attributes that define the sample. Despite our delays, we've ingested close to 17,000 samples since the last meeting. We're almost at 230,000 samples total. So for the sake of time, I want to move through these next slides pretty quickly. So we're shifting gears kind of from an update to the IMLGS to kind of, I guess, conversation starters. I thought we'd start with the data submission template, and its question, is everyone okay with it? It was dated 2015, way before my time, probably before the time of some of you. These bullets kind of capture the next 4 slides. I think we need to add some new fields. We'll talk about the samples and intervals. Everyone knows what samples and intervals are, but how do they relate with the IMLGS, in particular our database? And then we'll go through how to populate this data submission template. I'll use an example to kind of help explain, because I know, well, hold that thought when I get to that slide. So I know we need to add these 3 fields. Our database supports these 3 fields. Presumably lake and sample comments were in the ingest pipeline at some point in the past. They're not there now in the template, but so we need to add these back. And the database supports child IGSNs. I'm not sure how that was worked in the past, but you know, whether that was probably manually. There's not that many, but that's perhaps something we add in the future. And I put a question here: Are the headers, they make sense? Are they clear to everyone? So samples and intervals. Everyone knows what a sample is and an interval is. Interval and IMLGS speak is subsample. And one of I don't think Katie at University of Rhode Island's on, unless she joined recently, but the call recently. But she and I were talking by email, and she was asking some questions, and there was a lot of back and forth. And she's not the only one who's asked about this. So I thought maybe I'll spend a minute or two discussing how samples and intervals are in the IMLGS, and how our database handles that, And how does that relate to the submission template? So a sample could be a dredge sample, could be a long core. All those could be separated further into intervals or subsamples, or in the IMLGS, a sample could be just a rock plucked from the seabed. That too, in the IMLGS, is an interval. It does have a subsample. It's one, and that's just the way the relational database works for the IMLGS. The sample is where all the parent information is. Your interval or your subsample is the child information. And I don't think I can share this. I was going to kind of explain how this works using our submission template. Let me try to share this. Okay. Y'all see the Excel okay?
Yep, it just popped up.
Okay. So I took this was like an example file that Katie and I were emailing back and forth, and I tried to change it up a little bit. So some of this may not make sense, but and that doesn't matter. I just want to explain how these the submission templates are, how we organize the data and how it falls into the database. And so in this example, I made it a dredge sample, and moving over here to column AD, there's 3 subsamples, 3 intervals within this sample. Subsample 1, subsample 2, subsample 3. But and so if you see, I'm going through this quickly, so I'm probably doing a bad job explaining it, but each of these columns which I've highlighted, this is the parent information we looked at in the previous slide. All of these rows, all 3 of these rows, these columns have to be filled out, and it's the same information because it's the same sample, and though it's been broken down. Where's one? AD. It's been broken down into 3 intervals, and then this, where I've highlighted kind of in this orange, is these are the intervals. These are your subsample information. So this is where it changes a bit, and so all 3 rows have the same IGSN. And then I told you that we were missing. We need to add these 3 fields later. That'll be a later project. Anyways, I'm out of time, I see, but sorry I didn't do a good job explaining that. But I can share some of this stuff all on later. Maybe I can also, Alex, maybe share my presentation because there's a lot of slides I didn't get to. If folks can have a look at that if they like, and email me and ask me questions later.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe let's stop for questions, but I don't know. I know the group's pretty interested about the updates, so I don't know if you want to just try to go through your last slides quickly.
Sure.
And just
I don't want to
pop
take
in
from the next
there,
speaker.
Just to pop in there as the next speaker, I think. Go for it, Glenn. No problem. I've got a short presentation, so you can take.
Sure. Okay. All right. Well,
no problem.
I wouldn't want to take. Sorry. Thanks,
No
Shannon,
problem. No problem.
okay. I'll be quick. Okay.
And I'm seeing a quick question from Maisie. Will there be a way to submit deck logs, core descriptions, and images for samples through the API?
Chris, did you hear the question? Are we gonna be able to submit associated data like core images and?
No, the IMLGS doesn't support that as it is. So it only supports what the IMLGS supported previously. We just put an API in front of it, but that could be a future enhancement. Clint would be the one who would lead up that requirement for that. But
I'm still sharing my screen. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And that was Maisie. That was kind of a. I was gonna get to that a little later. Y'all see? Man, I need to Stop sharing. Let's try this again. Sorry, we don't work with Zoom. At the Department of Commerce doesn't allow us to. Every time we use it, it's all. Okay, I'll see that. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then, okay, so did we? So I guess what I was trying to say with the data submission template, you do have to, for every sample, if you want to break out like a dredge sample into several subsamples or a long core in several sections, every row for that sample, every row for that, just say for every subsample, for every slash interval, you have to populate, redundantly, you have to populate every row with the same parent information. And then you add a 1 or a 2, 1, 2, 3, down all the way down to the end of the sequence of subsamples, and then you can fill out however much information for each subsample. But every row of information has to for the parent information has to be filled out. All right, so moving on to I thought I'll be quickly some conversation starters for next year. I know from our last meeting, that was a big one that I took away, like a takeaway for me from the community was, the want from the community to streamline the process for submitting data to both CSAR and the IMLGS. And Kirsten's online, and if you recall from our email conversations, and Sarah took a new job that kind of took the wind out of our sails for that, but we've been in touch since, and hopefully maybe that's something we can work with the community on in the next year. And also, just to throw it out there, if there's any, and I think maybe this is kind of the question, I was kind of getting at your question, if there's any more data associated with y'all samples that perhaps should have been, you've submitted data to the IMLGS, and since scientists come back to your lab and done more research, and maybe you've been able to ingest that data into your database, is that something you'd like to submit to the IMLGS? And if so, is there something that's keeping y'all from doing that? Is it too laborious? Like imagery, Oregon State mentioned that like they update their image. Y'all mentioned this at a previous meeting last year. You update your images based on others coming in, people coming in to use it, and so you want to update that image to show where that core has been sampled, as an example. It's quite laborious to just have to send NCI an updated image. If you could do that through the API, that would be helpful. So it's noted, and so maybe something we can work out in the future or find another way. And then I thought I'd just touch on a couple things, is because this came up recently with a curator. You're more than welcome to submit proprietary data formats, like an image file. It's proprietary to a certain maker. But if you would, please also submit like a mirror copy of take a look at the file formats that's recommended, and because it's these file formats that are probably going to be understood in future generations. And then lastly, FYI, we've been championing the IMLGS over the last year. Alex joined me for a talk we gave at the Interagency Integrated Ocean and Coastal Mapping Seminar last December, and we've presented recently in Austin, and we hope to do so at a couple or 2 or 3 meetings here in the near future. And so with that, Jamie, thanks for giving me a few more minutes, and thanks everybody else.
Great. Thanks, Clint. And I see Kirsten has had her hand up for a couple minutes. So go ahead, Kirsten.
Sorry, Kirsten, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly check in on this notion of submitting data to, I think I need to switch off my video. I'm at the airport, so sorry for the background noise and everything. I would strongly suggest that we, rather than, people sending their data to IMLGS, which I'm not sure how far it is providing repository services with DOI assignment for data and so on. We should think about more interoperability between the IMLGS and the data repositories, including like Magic and EarthChem and Neotoma and so on, you know, who basically curate the discipline-specific aspects of the data. And then we can use actually the IGSN to do these connections, as, you know, at least some of the data systems have set up APIs that you can harvest data for a given IGSN. So I'm just throwing that out as something that we should probably discuss at some point.
Thank you, Kirsten. Yeah, maybe we can connect. I'd like to connect off, you know, in the near future, you know, about this and some other things that we talked about last year, our vocabularies and stuff. So. Any other questions, or if I should give Jamie his time back?
Sorry,
Well,
I think
it looks like I got that mixed up.
yeah, I think Caesar, Kirsten, and I are going first, actually.
Yep, and Kirsten, I got your note, so whenever you have to take off to get to your gate, please do, and then I will document all questions, and we'll get that to you later, so.
Okay, great. I mean, we don't have big updates because we have just in May at the ESIP meeting provided an update about CSAR and, you know, our considerations of new services in the future as we're changing our architecture based on the Internet of Samples project. And the other thing being the new IGSN structure and registration that basically allows us to serve different institutions who want to have their own prefixes. The only sort of exciting thing that I wanted to mention, but that is a little further away from everybody else's scope, is that the new data policy of NASA actually includes a mandate for registering samples with IGSN. So that will give, I think, the IGSN and CSAR a boost in, you know, what will be registered in the future. And the use, they specifically point to use of IGSNs when citing samples in the literature. So again, something great for our community. And now I'm just going to wait for any questions that people may have with respect to CSAR.
Okay, and I had some questions. So I did share out the webinar that was recorded, which was very helpful. Thank you so much, because some of us could not be there for it live. So yeah, I had a question about, so in terms of, I understand the DOI prefix, but for scripts, for example, will we retain that SOI prefix, or does that go away?
So that prefix would stay if you want to stay with doing your registrations through CSAR or AIDA. You know, it's basically within the namespace or the prefix that CSAR gives to every sample that's registered through CSAR. We ensure uniqueness of the names within our prefix, within our scope, by making the suffix of the IGSN unique, right? If we would allow anybody who comes through CSAR to just put in any string, we would have a chance to duplicate numbers, right? So by still keeping the suffix unique based on your SIO or SI prefix or any of the old prefixes, I would call them. We make sure that within the CSAR namespace, every IGSN is unique. So if, you know, some organizations at the time that the IGSN changed and became a DOI, some organizations wanted to get their own prefix, and we have done that. We are a member of DataCite and are able to give an organization its own prefix, and then they can just use their own numbering system that's just gives locally unique identifiers and make them suffixes in the IGSN, because the the handle prefix is unique, right? So it's complicated. It's better to show that on a slide, I think, but for anyone who continues to go through CSAR, nothing is really changing.
Okay, great. And then I may have missed this in Clint's presentation, just taking notes and such, but have the IGSNs been updated in the IMLGS, or is that something that's going to happen with the next update to accommodate up to 32 characters? So I don't know if that's a question for Clint maybe versus Kirsten, but.
As far as I know, I don't think it's been updated.
No, with the new prefix, no. And to be, and that's kind of, it may have, I don't know if we talked about it at the past meeting, but that may be the first time I heard about it. But I did make a note, and that's something we're gonna, and we'll take care of in the near future.
Okay, great. Yeah, because what I was trying to figure out was, you know, for me currently giving out samples, you know, in the next week or few weeks to, I guess I will just manually update my IGSNs, but there's always a, you know, risk in doing that. So, so yeah, I just want to make sure I'm not propagating an incorrect IGSN or incomplete, as it were. So, so yeah. And I don't know if anybody else has an issue with that, or how they're disseminating their IGSNs to users. Maybe that's a kind of a question for the group. Okay, maybe nobody's having that problem.
I can't imagine, but you know, it's a really important point that, you know, at least on the web pages and so on, it needs to be clear what the prefix is, because that's now critical. It's something that I've been very concerned and about, and not very happy that the IGSN went that route, but it's the way it is now. And so we need to figure out maybe how CSAR can also help with that process, right?
Yeah, the reason I asked about the IMLGS is I've been kind of operating with my, when I reorganized my data over a decade ago, I was working with data dumps from the IMLGS. And so I will just have to go in and repopulate that. So you know, it wouldn't necessarily be super manual, but okay, noted. I will make sure I do that.
Maybe we should set up a separate discussion with those who are interested to figure out a process how to do that.
Yeah, and I also noticed there have been a couple people interested in using the Mars middleware that I developed with Jim Bowring. So he's working on getting that up and running this week. But I did notice that you know, because Mars communicates directly with CSAR's backend, I am seeing the DOI, you know, that DOI prefix through Mars. So any new things, any new dredges or cores will automatically get that IGSN. So that won't be a problem moving forward. It's just will be our legacy samples. So.
I don't think it'll be any issue for it won't be any issue for the IMLGS to update the prefix for what's in the database. That'll be a non-issue.
I mean, it would only be if any of the allocating agents, and not the allocating agent, sorry, of the repositories has moved away from CISA to a different allocating agents, then they would have a different prefix as those who are still with CISA. So for example, the USGS has taken all the IGSNs that they had registered with us out into their own system, and they have a different prefix now. So you can't assume that the prefix is the same for all the samples that are in the IMLGS.
Right, so I guess before we make any move, I mean, standard practice for NCI, we would definitely communicate with all curators before we made an edit to your data. I mean, we would only make an edit to your information if you tell us to. And so I think what we'd have to do, as you suggested, Kirsten, is get those who want their IMLGS, their IGSNs updated to to say so, and to provide the prefix, and then we can do that. I guess maybe to follow on that question, Kirsten, is that something? I think Kirsten said she has to go, but is that something we want to do offline or wait till the next meeting? I think that's something we could do offline.
We
One-on-one.
we could start this offline. I think, IMLGS and CISA need a discussion anyway, where we're going to sort of build connections where they make the most sense, and how to recommend to the repositories a workflow for IGSN registration and metadata submission to both IMLGS and CISA, how to streamline that process. And then I think a different discussion would be just inviting all the repositories to discuss how, the changes in the IGSN structure should be communicated to their users, and, how they can update their databases. Yeah, sorry, guys, I have to make my way. Take care. This was a great meeting, Alex. Thank you so much for organizing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kirsten. Safe flight, and we'll continue to talk for the next 6 minutes, probably.
Thank you.
Okay. Talk to you soon. Okay, any other questions or concerns? Say's here now to answer field questions. One thing, I re-listened to the webinar, and one of the questions that did come up was about cost. So it sounded like the cost shouldn't be an issue for most repositories. It would just be if, a repository decided to upload all of their IGSNs at one time. I may be in that boat at some point, but I didn't know, did any other repository worry about the costs or have any questions about that? That was just something that kind of came to mind. It didn't seem like there was anybody on this at this meeting who's kind of new and will be dumping hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands. So.
Yeah, hi, Alex. What were the costs associated with? Because I didn't have a chance to look at that recording and I wasn't there, so.
Sure, yeah, and say you may want to answer this more directly, but it didn't sound like there would be a cost for repositories that were just kind of regularly updating or ingesting data to say sorry to get the IGSNs. But it sounded like if you were going to dump, say, thousands of samples, that there may be an associated cost, so that there could be.
So sorry to cut you off.
Go ahead.
So with the data site merger, I guess the best way to say it, we have a cost that X amount of samples that we register with DOIs will cost X amount. And while we haven't really discussed any cost plans with our repositories or our users yet, we're thinking if you are a big repository who again are coming in with maybe like 10,000 or plus samples, then our tier in which our registration for that year will have to go up. And because of that, we're thinking the best way to able to sustain and manage this would be that each repository submitting 10,000 or more samples, whatever it is, which we haven't discussed yet still, will help contribute for their section or their registration process for it. And the costs are not going to be extensive or extreme. They're just going to be part of, I guess, the overall payment that we would make as CSAR, the repository data management tool to the data site itself. Does that answer your question? This is something that we are still in the works about. We haven't really had any users who have been registering tens of thousands of samples yet. And again, this is something that we are still discussing internally.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. And that'll be a conversation when I start to upload a bunch of core data. That's something that I can talk to you offline too. And maybe I can be a test subject for creating a rate if I hit that 10,000 mark. So
yeah, happy to just email us, and we're happy to work with everyone. I just want to note that we also, at the end of the webinar, that if you haven't watched already, we do have a questionnaire for our users. If you don't mind taking just 15 minutes out and just answering those questions, is really helpful for us to start developing and thinking about what our community really needs in order for us to evolve and improve CSAR. Oh, thank you. I could also add the link on the notes page too. I'll do that later.
Perfect. Yeah, I figured I'd throw it up right now if people want to just click it. And that was my other question, was if that was still active, or I didn't want to direct people to it if it was done. So.
No, absolutely. It's still active. We're trying to gather as much responses as possible. And it's always nice to have continuous response. And if there's any changes to it, then we'll let our community and the curators and users know and do a follow-up or tell everyone there's an edit to it. But so far, these are just kind of general questions that about our interface, like a search interface and our services that are provided.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I know you also put in the chat the link to that webinar. So for folks who did not get the chance to listen to it, it is quite insightful and helpful for all the updates to the IGSN. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Alex.
Could I make a quick comment? As far as BGS is concerned, we're seriously involved with the CSAR interface to IGSNs, and at the moment we have certainly been registering samples. But cost is important, and looking forward, we're likely to be involved with the DISCO UK project, which is part or associated with the DISCO Europe, and that, I assume, is going to need lots of persistent identifiers. And I'm just worried that the IGSNs might be pricing themselves out of the market, given that there are other alternatives, such as ARC, for example, available too. Because, of course, most of our museum specimens already have unique registration numbers within the UK. So the uniqueness is not critical, but the actionable nature of it is. But there are other alternatives to IGSNs. And it really depends if UKRI, our research council, funds IGSNs, that's fine, it won't be an issue. But if they don't, I can see it'll be a real problem.
I think we should talk. Right, I understand what you're talking about. I think it's something that we could probably talk offline about. Again, we haven't said anything yet, and this is still something that we're considering. Again, it also depends how many samples they're planning on registering. I can't remember what tier we are and how many samples we are set to register per year at currently. I would have to check that. So if you want to just email us and we could talk about it and start a discussion.
Yeah, my understanding at the moment, I think we can register up to 100,000 a year free through the CSAR interface. But we're talking about the first project, our rock collections would be something like 300,000. And this is just BGS. And if we put our entire geoscience collections on, you're talking about 16 million. So its cost will be actually quite critical. And I say they all have unique numbers at the moment, unique registration numbers. It's just they're not actionable. So all we need is that actionable bit. And there are other ways than IGSNs to providing that actionable link. So I think you have to be very careful about the price structure.
Okay, we'll take that into consideration. Thank you, Mike. That's a really good point.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we are doing pretty good on time, actually, still. We're just 2 minutes over. Are there any other questions? Doesn't seem like it. Okay, so I think then we will move on to Jamie. He's going to give us a repository update for the Polar Rock repository. So great, and you are connected. So go ahead and take over.
You can hear me now? Yeah, hey, so thanks everybody. This is really great to be here. So I'm a new face to this group. My name is Jamie Stutz. I'm a former postdoc in New Zealand. Actually started here at the Rock Repository as my first paid geology job back in 2010 or so. So it's a big full circle, and working under and I grew down for this as well. So just as a primer, happy to see a couple of other new faces here as well. So just as a primer, the Polar Rock Repository, we're based here at the Bird Polar and Climate Research Center at the Ohio State University, celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. So we're pretty excited about that. And you know, we hold all of these rock samples, terrestrial rock samples from Antarctica, as well as dredge samples from the Southern Ocean. Looking else from the seaboard, we've got some interesting manganese nodules there as well from the Southern Ocean. And yeah, so we've got the over 60,000 log now, catalog now. And you know, we've got this really nice website that I'll point to later. And you know, quite a lot of outreach engagement as well with the wider community. We've got these amazing polar rock boxes that we send out to schools around the country every year, and it's a big hit. So we do a lot of outreach as well. So that's just a quick primer to us. And yeah, just some of the updates here. So personnel updates. So talked about myself. We have a new curator as well, although she's not necessarily new as well. She's former Polar Rock Repository postdoc. So Erica Maletic is leading up our day-to-day curation, and all the while still working under Anne's leadership. So a big new update for us is really expanding our user base. And this comes in kind of expanding from the traditional role we had, which was kind of serving the more hardcore geology of Antarctica, whereas now we're kind of much more focused on climate and emerging biological sciences. So our rocks have things on them, and we're busy classifying them. But unfortunately, in a few cases, we need some extra help from some people that know a little bit more about things on rocks. So just a couple examples up here on the right. Some cool examples. A beautiful coral on the dredge sample. Those corals may be great indicators of ecosystem over the past however long since they've been growing on there when they were collected. And the lichens as well up on land can serve that function. So and then we're 3D scanning these as well for that kind of improved identification. So the dream there is that we take these 3D scans, we get them on a page for that sample, and the user could then flip it around as if they're kind of holding it in real time or in real space, and that could help them in their identification. We are doing various web upgrades at the moment. We're kind of in what we're calling phase 1, where we're updating our security of servers. We're moving over to Amazon Web Services and updating the security upgrades. But I do just want to flag this with the group that we are looking for to do much more expensive upgrades, and for that we'll be extending invitations to collaborate on that and looking for partners. So I'll put the web address in the chat here in a moment, but use our website, and it's not just for rocks. So we've got a really big growing archive of imagery from around Antarctica, and it uses that same database engine, so that can really give you a flavor for kind of how it could work for your purposes. And we've updated our discoverability by kind of including those publications on the much used Google Scholar. Yeah, and those are the big ones for us. A lot in flux with the new people, and certainly for me, it's really exciting to work with this group and learn the lingo. I'm a geologist, so learning the lingo here is obviously going to be a major part of my job. So I'm appreciative of the patience for folks on this call and also your support. So that's it for me. Happy to take any questions.
Jim, can you put a link to your website in the chat?
I did say I was going to do that.
No, that'd be great. I'm going to put it in the notes.
Thank you.
And how do you support your, I mean, I don't know, when you do need upgrades, do you go to Ohio State to support that, or is that an in-house build for your website and database?
Yeah, it's an in-house build. Wes Haynes is a really talented programmer and is a friend of the repositories, and we've been lucky enough to keep him around. He's got his own private business, but yeah, we employ him to help with that. And Anne is on the call if I fall short of anything. Any other.
Yeah, I'll just add that Wes is doing a kind of a big update for us now with security and sort of cleaning up the back end of the database. So once that happens, which is this remainder of the summer and into the fall, then the database will be up, good to run without any particular problems for years. But then the next phase would be to explore how to improve it on top of what it already does. So there's all sorts of bells and whistles that could be added, or new new users who want to set up their own platform using our back end for their own purposes, and whatever bells and whistles they might want, and how we might try to make that all happen is something that we'd like to discuss that for anybody who's interested to contact myself or Jamie.
Yeah, thanks, Anne.
Okay, great. Yes, and I will be contacting you both for ongoing conversations that Anne and I have started. So. Okay, do we have any other questions? If not, we're a little bit ahead of time, which is good, so we can, some of the upcoming sessions are a little bit shorter, down to 15 minutes, so we may get a little extra time there. So if we don't have any more questions, let's move on to Michelle, and she will give us an update for the Gulf Coast repository at IODP.
All right, just share my screen.
Sure, great. Yep, we're seeing it, so you're good to go.
All right, now to make it, oh, it's going in presenter mode on the other screen. Haven't actually used PowerPoint in a while now that I realize. I'm just gonna give it like this. Keep it simple. All right, thanks for putting this on, Alex. It's a great meeting. We've had a really busy year here at the GCR. Especially the last few months have really, it's been a whirlwind. So just start, we've added a couple of new faces to our team this past year. We have Jesse Yee on here today. He's our new XRF lab manager. So we're super glad to have him on board. And James Kowalski, who's a new curatorial specialist. This is a port call week. So James is just getting off the JR and he's taking some well-deserved vacation, and Carl is getting on the ship, so they're not here. And I don't think Chad's schedule permitted him to be here, though he may join a little bit late if we're still going. So kind of the biggest thing that's impacted us here this year, I would think many in this community have heard about it, is that NSF announced their decision to retired the Joides Resolution drill ship here at the end of, they announced at the end of March. So we will be ceasing operating IODP expeditions on the JR at the end of the fiscal year 2024. What that means is that the last expedition that we're going out and collecting cores on will be in a year from now. Next August will be the end of our last expedition. Gives us 4 remaining expeditions and core that we will be receiving. So after 2024, I mean, there's still lots of uncertainty and things are being figured out about what is going to be happening with the IODP program, which is an international program. So the European and Japanese consortiums will be moving forward operating expeditions on the CHICU and mission-specific platforms. So this means as those expeditions happen, we may receive some core in the future. So there is an MSP that is happening in a couple of weeks really soon off of Hawaii, drilling into some old coral reefs. So we'll eventually get those cores here. But beyond that, it's unclear what new cores we'll be receiving at the GCR after 2024. So it's a really big shakeup for us and all of us, and not just the Gulf Coast Repository, but everyone at the Joides Resolution Science Operator, which we're all it's all like the same entity, basically. The repository will continue after the JR has been retired, and there's MOUs with the 2 other IODP core repositories in Japan and Germany to keep the cores in their current locations through the end of 2029. But past that, it's really unclear what is going to happen to the cores, and if they'll stay split amongst the 3 repositories, or if they would be consolidated back into the United States. So things are constantly changing, and we're just getting through it day by day. So for big impacts with the GCR, when the JR is retired, all of the instrumentation on the ship is owned by the Texas A&M Research Foundation, which means that all of the wonderful instruments get to come back to us here in Texas. While, I'd much prefer having instruments on the ship, it is a good opportunity to then have them available on shore for people to make all sorts of measurements on older cores or potentially, new cores that are coming in. We don't have a full business model set for the repository after 2024 yet, so we're working on it. But we are moving ahead with making some major renovations to our lab spaces in the repository to be able to accommodate a whole wide variety of instruments from the ship. There's all sorts of core loggers, core physical properties, line scan imaging systems, a line scan X-ray unit, all sorts of microscopes, a cryogenic magnetometer, a paleomag spinner, thin section making equipment, XRD, a whole suite of geochemistry lab equipment. And so we're going to be doing major renovations here in the next year. We've gotten a project manager in place with the university and accounts set up. So we're going to start design here in the next few weeks and hoping to be able to begin renovations in January so that we can get most everything completed, hopefully around this time next year, not, in September 2024. So we're ready to receive instruments coming off the JR. So big changes with that. On top of everything going on with the JR demobilization, we've also been dealing with some really interesting problems with a recent expedition. This was Expedition 399. They drilled uplifted rocks on the Atlantis Massif, kind of along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge this spring. They were really successful with their drilling. They were able to penetrate over 1,000 meters deep into these uplifted, mantle type rocks. Really cool. But it presented some interesting hazardous core challenges. So these cores have these veins of naturally occurring chrysotile and tremolite, which are essentially asbestos. So you can see, I put just some pictures of the core. You can see along these veins within the core material, these really white, bright, fibrous minerals. And it's not just a little bit of these fibrous asbestos minerals. It's quite a lot of it. So this is really, it's been challenging to figure out how to work with and handle hazardous core materials. And this is kind of why I suggested to Alex that we could potentially have a conversation as a community on handling core materials that could be dangerous to human health. And I think that's not necessarily just asbestos. There's other health concerns as well. In this center picture here, you can see in a lot of this serpentinized rock, there's lots of these white veins. It's not all asbestos. Some of it is definitely calcite veins, but enough is asbestos that it's a really big concern for us. So out on the ship, this is just a quick overview of some of the safety procedures that they put in place to handle the core. It was definitely very challenging. We were not expecting to recover, first off, so much core. The core recovery was over 1,000 meters during this expedition of gabbros and serpentinite, which is a lot of hard rock. And we also were not prepared to handle this much asbestos in the core material. So the folks on the ship, they built an enclosure around the core splitting saw to help keep any dust that's produced during the splitting process contained. And then when they were in there splitting the core and cutting samples, the technical staff were wearing respirators and hazmat suits while doing it, which presents a lot of just physical challenges in working with this core. They also enclosed one of the rock saws with plastic and had like a glove box built there for cutting samples, which I don't know, I can't even imagine. I heard it was impossible to see what you were doing, impossible to feel what you were doing when cutting samples. So really hard. A bonus challenge we also had during this expedition is that when we do our normal hard rock curation processes, we have little plastic bins we use to keep all of the hard rock pieces in place and in stratigraphic order. And they recovered so much core. The recovery was so good. The drilling was so fast. We ran out of bins. So we weren't able to fully complete our hard rock curation practices. Part of our hard rock curation also includes affixing tiny little labels on each piece of core. And that we glue on with epoxy, but to help keep any potential dust from getting kicked up, we worked with all the cores wet on the ship. And so that meant we were not able to epoxy any labels on a significant amount of core. So really impacted a lot of our curation procedures on the ship. So this leads to really what's honestly been my main focus the past month and a half has been the aftermath of Expedition 399 and dealing with these hazardous cores. So ideally when you're working with asbestos, you're having air monitoring. So you know how much of these minerals are getting kicked up in the air and what your exposure limits are. And, that really wasn't possible out on the ship. We didn't have the equipment. So no one really knows what the risk level of working with these cores are. Because of that, we're starting off making the assumption there's lots of dust, asbestos dust getting in the air, and that we're going to need to do any work with these cores, wearing respirators, hazmat suits, in a space that has a negative air pressures, and any of the air coming out of the space goes through a HEPA filter, so that there's, asbestos dust isn't getting out and about. And we're not. Our environmental health and safety group has asked us not to do this in our building HVAC system, just in case, because we don't know how much dust is getting generated. And any space we have that is not adjacent to people's offices and is not in the main HVAC system is going to be renovated this next year, which means that we are renting a double wide trailer and putting it in our parking lot for the next year to do all of this work. Which is going to be a lot of logistics of basically setting up a brand new lab space, moving pallets of core in and out of this trailer, probably multiple times. because we have not only a big recuration effort on the cores, but the science party needs to come back and they need to describe the cores, collect samples for thin sections, paleomag, bulk density work that will go into their shipboard reports. And then we're going to have to collect personal samples for all these scientists as well, all in this double wide trailer. We're also venturing into some new territory for us, which is splitting cores here on shore. Typically, all the core we receive at the GCR has been split on the JOIDES resolution, so we've never worried about it. But now they had 75 meters of core they were unable to split on the ship, so we're working on building a core splitter, which is this picture down here below is our core splitter with some air handlers. The splitter will be fully enclosed in plexiglass so dust doesn't escape. And then on the right side here is, I call it our misting table. Basically, it's going to be a table that has water misters up above, and this will be constantly keeping these cores wet so that we can work with the cores wet before we split them. And eventually we'll be doing a lot of dry work, and all of that will be done in this trailer. So we're really kind of figuring things out every day. There's a new weird problem that no one ever thought we would have to deal with this. So it's been a learning experience. Oh, and I guess just it's also, this is a good thing. I think we're doing this because one of our upcoming expeditions, 402, which is drilling once again some uplifted, potentially mantle rocks in the Mediterranean, may also get some of these chrysotile and tremolite mineral formation as well. So we're trying to learn as much as we can so we can then apply appropriate safety precautions during this expedition. All right, so on to some more fun stuff that we've been doing this past few months. This summer we had Jenna Everard here working at the Gulf Coast Repository, helping us recurate the San Andreas Fault Observatory at Depth cores. So this is a collection that we kind of inherited a few years ago from some PIs who were based at Texas A&M. And this collection kind of just had been sitting in a corner of the repository, and we didn't even have a good list of the core sections. And Jenna was here sampling some of these cores for her PhD in the winter. And, we noticed lots of things like labels falling off of core boxes, cores put in the boxes upside down, and just a general lack of documentation. So she spent 2 months here this summer recurating the cores, cataloging everything, including all of the returned and samples and residue samples that we have. She also re-imaged all the cores that needed updated images and did an extensive lit search on all the publications related to the SAFOD cores. So it's really great. She's compiled all of this into a Google site webpage that we'll have published soon to make all of this core information accessible. The hope is that we can make it a lot easier for researchers who want to work with this to know what's available and how to work with it. So she's starting her PhD at Lamont this fall. So if you're at Lamont and you see her, say hello, please. She'll also have a presentation at AGU on this recuration effort as well. Another big project that we successfully wrapped up this spring is finishing a new sample request website. So our old one was really quite old. It felt like just a blast from the past. And now we're in the modern era with a nice web user interface for our sample request system. So we're happy to have that wrapped up. I think I mentioned us working on this at the meeting last year, but I put a link to it here. If you're interested in checking it out, feel free. So we've also been having lots of our normal sample parties this past year. We've had four of them, 3 at the Bremen Core Repository that we've supported, and then 1 here at the Gulf Coast Repository last fall. I really love these 2 pictures on the right from Bremen because they just bag all their samples in essentially garbage bags, and I think it just, for such precious material, it just looks like trash. It's kind of funny. In the middle, they took This sample party took 55,000 samples from 6 kilometers of core. I think it's the most samples we ever took during a sample party. And it doesn't look like a lot, I think, until you compare it to a recent sample party from 3 weeks ago where they took 15,000 samples, to put it all into perspective. So we'll be busy. Hopefully we'll have some great new updates too for the in-person meeting next year, and some nice new lab spaces we can share photos of.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Michelle. You guys have a lot going on. I'm going to open it up to questions. So any questions for Michelle?
I have one last thing I forgot to mention, is that we are going to try and get the SAFOD cores registered in CSAR. So Saves, we may have I may send an email to you here soon. I think Jenna may have some questions on all this.
Absolutely, just send it to me.
Thanks. I'm looking at stuff here this afternoon, so.
Yeah, no rush, whenever you're ready.
Thanks.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'll be reaching out to you, Michelle, to ask questions about we're getting core shipped here to Scripps, so I need to get ready for that on my end. So
yeah, that's a whole. That feels so far away right now.
Yeah. We've got a little time. I need time to play Tetris on my end with space. It's just getting fuller and fuller by the day. So we'll figure it out.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. And I'm gonna apologize. There was literally a helicopter just overhead. So if I just cut out real quick, it's just because I don't know what's going on. But we're doing great on time. So with that, we will move on to Susie to talk about disaster management plans.
Thank you, Alex.
You're welcome. Thank you for bringing up this topic again. So.
Let me try. Okay, hopefully you can see this.
Yep, looks great.
Thank you. So this is just a really short presentation, just a few updates from our discussions that we had last year in person. And for those who potentially weren't there at Alex's great meeting last year at Scripps, we talked a little bit for a while about disaster management and how perhaps we should think about how we would secure our repositories and our samples if there was some kind of incident, anything really from fires to maybe a water leak, or perhaps even some kind of natural hazard like earthquakes. I know that some repositories in the US have lots of different kind of issues that may be risking these amazing sample repositories. So we were thinking about it a little bit in the UK, thinking about what kind of documentation that maybe we should have in place. It's quite a hard thing to think about, mainly because the types of potential issues and potential risks are quite wide and varied. So how do you build in a response when you don't really know what you're kind of targeting? So this first slide just kind of gives you an idea of how wide this kind of topic is, and what we were trying to think about at Boscorf. But then last year, this was actually something that we had to put into place, and we were actually too late. We had these conversations back in August, but then in October, we actually had an incident at the National Oceanography Centre where the repository is based. We had a small fire, which was caused by basically an IT backup power supply, basically igniting. So there is good procedures on site so basically the fire alarm sounded and everyone promptly left all the buildings on site, and this was very well managed with all the knock procedures that we have. And of course, luckily nobody was hurt, and very little damage was actually done to the building. However, I was on a very nice holiday at the time and was oblivious to most of this happening. So it was my staff on site trying to deal with this live situation that was kind of a moving situation. So for example, on the day, they originally were thinking that people could get back into the building because it was only a small fire, and then they realized the risk was still there, and basically the fire reignited, and they decided, the fire service decided that it would be best if the site was left empty. This happened on a Thursday, and the decision was made on the day that they would not open the site again till the Monday. So staff were given a very small window to allow them back into the buildings, away from the fire, to then pick up personal belongings and do whatever was necessary to secure offices and areas they'd been working in for the shutdown. So this was what happened. But because there was no real procedures in place, there was a few things that were lacking. So for example, the coordination of any kind of laboratories that had biological or chemical or radiation type materials in them, or even kind of hazardous samples. We've just talked a lot about hazardous samples with Michelle. We have quite a lot of hazardous samples as well. And none of this was secured in a systematic way. Lab managers were making decisions on their own on the day of how best to deal with their area, and there wasn't an overall site response and an overall coordinated response. So lessons were learned from that, and we've been working hard over the last year to really put into place and develop new kind of procedures that are site-wide, so that we can all do things much better in the future, to make sure that everyone's taking the same steps and the correct steps to make sure that all sample storage areas and laboratories are responding, and managers are responding in the same way across these areas. And we've also then put together a procedural document, and then also put down emergency shutdown procedures as well. I'll share a little bit about what we've done. So we've put in place an incident management procedure specifically for labs and sample storage areas. Just to say, it's not just sediment cores that we have at the National Oceanography Centre site. We have a rock stores, and we also have biological samples. So that means biological samples stored in ethanol predominantly. So all these types of samples have different needs. So it's really kind of putting together how we manage these. So the main thing the procedural document covers is the emergency procedures that need to be taken, the roles and responsibility of various people. So for example, lab managers, repository managers, as well as technicians, and also the health and safety team and other estates management people across the site as well. We also have worked hard to try and identify priority areas and special consideration areas. So as I mentioned, the biological samples, for example, that are in flammable liquids have to have special considerations and need to be prioritized under certain circumstances. And then we've also, obviously the incident was around IT, and basically data was lost as part of this fire last year. So across the site, there's new kind of considerations about how IT deal with data backups and how we can basically stop any data loss in the future. So that's something that we've covered as well as part of this document. Specifically for us, we have in our kind of repository and labs associated with Boscorf, we've got some priority areas that we've identified when we're evacuating the facility. So for example, you can see I've listed obviously how we then look to then prioritize things if we were to evacuate quickly. So obviously people come first, then radiation comes second. We have an MSCL that obviously has a gamma density source in it. So we need to basically make sure that that's secure. Then we were talking a little bit, as I say, about hazardous samples. So we have what's called APHA licensed materials. So these are basically terrestrial samples from outside the EU. So they're considered a risk by the UK government. So we have to make sure they're handled in a different way. So we need to make sure that these are handled properly in some types of kind of emergencies. And then we have obviously equipment, and then you'll see actually that the number 5 is actually where the cores come in our priority list. This was something that was under hot discussion before these priorities were then decided upon. On the other side of the slide, you can see some of the different types of responses that we then have put together. So for example, we've worked out a contingency plan working on kind of 3 levels depending on the amount of time we have for an evacuation. So an immediate one, so really listing and understanding what our immediate responses would be, an urgent evacuation, and then a more controlled one, which would then be longer than basically 30 minutes. So this is what an emergency shutdown procedure looks like. We have these for each of our instrumentation. We also have them for each of our sample types as well. And this really just gives people a guide to what needs to be done. Obviously, if you've got no time and it is something that we need to urgently evacuate, then a lot of our stuff has big red buttons that you can press and then run. But it's also about making this type of information available much wider than the immediate small team at Boscorf, but to others at the site as well, so they really understand, so that it will allow people, so for example, security or estates management people where there is a hazard, to be able to go in and safely shut down areas. So this type of information is being more widely distributed and is done in a way where people can really easily see what needs to be done to secure these high-risk areas across the site. And also high value assets, like for example, samples. Samples are a high value asset, and making sure that areas are secure is important. And we have now these kind of procedures to allow anyone on site to be able to help secure these if for example, repository staff aren't available. So this is the type of thing we've been working on over the last year, and I'm very willing to share any information. So that was all I was going to say for today.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I was glad to hear that nobody was injured, but that is definitely scary. So I'll open up to questions at first, so let other people weigh in.
I have to say, I really like the diagrams you had for shutting the instruments down, because they seemed very simple, and that if you had a first responder go in, they could follow it to turn it down, say if something happened on the weekend.
Yeah, so the whole idea is that there is a maximum of a 2 A4 page guide stuck on the side of each of the instruments, so that anyone can literally follow either a 5-stage shutdown procedure or a 10-stage shutdown procedure, depending on how much time's available. And it very clearly states what you should follow depending on the level of emergency. And of course, like, for example, if it's something really urgent, then samples get left in the instrumentation, but then there's a secondary step that allows people, if they've got up to 30 minutes or a bit longer, to then secure samples by removing them and making sure they're secured. But it was an interesting process to go through, and obviously understanding how many steps need to be taken and how much rehearsal we have to do in future of this, and making sure that everyone who's working in the repository really understands that there is these contingency plans in place, and rehearsing them is now of kind of prioritized that we do this. So yeah, it was really interesting to do that, and it's nice to hear that Kurt is thinking along these lines as well.
I have a quick question. Do you have any issues with jurisdiction and anybody like who ultimately it should or shouldn't make a decision about what you do with your facility?
Yeah, so there's a very strict hierarchy on site about, so there's a whole business continuity management plan, and there is a response group of senior people who kind of kick off that procedure if needed, like it was in October. And we then just feed into them, and our procedure outlines how we would feed in the information that they need if, for example, we basically leave the facility in a some kind of emergency, leaving out either hazardous samples or X-rays running or whatever it is. And we then, there's in our procedure ways that we then basically touch base with the health and safety team that sits in that response group during the incident, and then how we follow it up through a management chain.
Sounds complicated.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and Susie, there was a request to share your slides. So I did that. Your last slide, I did copy and paste into the notes, and I did take notes, but if you feel okay to share.
I've sent you a copy so you can upload them.
Okay, perfect. I will. I just wanted to make sure it was okay to share.
Yep.
And thank you for sending that. Yeah, we had an interesting thing happen at Scripps, and I also was away. Luckily, I had some cell phone reception, but we had a whole transformer blow. And so that cut power not only to our lab, but also to the entire building. So we're going to be operating on temporary power. They say 1.5 years, which probably means 5 to 7 years. So yeah, this has also come to the forward front of my mind. So as we get our new XRF and get more and more people into the lab, I will be working on this as well for us, and hopefully more directly with our institution. So Susie, I know you have like your committee that kind of oversees the collections and all of your procedures. Did you have to clear this with them, or is this something that was more in-house? And
it's more in-house across the NOC site, because there's multiple collections and multiple labs that we put together a working group within the NOC site to then put this together. But as you're saying, it's quite interesting that I was away when this happened, and I was on a beach somewhere, and I'm trying to get good phone reception, and then it was really interesting that it became, because it was a moving situation, it was quite late on after people had left site that it became obvious that there may be further risk of power outages and everything else because of it being an electrical issue. And we were very worried about, obviously, our XRF machine that had been left on. So we had to then get special permission for one of the technicians to get back on site to then power that down systematically. And that's what really led to these kind of independent kind of contingency plans and really understanding the hierarchy of how we protect these instruments if people are going to be off-site for a long time or if the situation is likely to change. So we kind of looked through that in much more detail once we realized that the fluctuations in power could potentially be really damaging. But we've done also lots of checks now about how our cold storage system is linked into the general management system across the site. So they now get warnings of heating or cooling errors, so they can manage that for us much better. And they've now done a lot more work to be able to then monitor that type of stuff off-site. They could always manage that from a security office on the gate, and now they've been upgrading the systems to now allow them to monitor that type of stuff off-site, which hasn't been done previously. So that's a really good outcome from our perspective, knowing that if, for example, the site was shut for weeks on end, that we would have some confidence that cooling was continuing in our refrigerated areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, Nicole, I'll let you go. Because they asked me, they're like, what can we do for your cores? Do you want us to get some type of a cooling system? And I was like, well, if you're confident you can get power restored by the end of the day, just leave the doors closed, just minimize going in and out. But yeah, I don't know that we've come up with a long-term plan if power was going to be out for quite some time. There is a backup generator, so I assume that would take over. But if for some reason with that transformer blowing, I was concerned the XRF was on and plugged in, and somehow that thing did not implode. But when it's such a big, it kind of almost explosion, it could just shoot. Just blow out your entire ability to get power for a while. So yeah, that's something I would be interested if anybody has had to try to refrigerate a refrigerator without having power to it. I just don't know if there's a solution to that. But we were almost there, but it didn't happen. So
well,
go ahead,
we're
Nicole.
currently in that situation, in that exact situation. We had a regular power outage due to a storm a week ago. But when the power, we have a backup generator for our building, because the campus servers, the server room is also in our building. So we have a backup generator, but when power was restored, there's still an ongoing problem that they're fixing, going from the outside power to the building. So our generator had to keep going for over a week. And it isn't. And then, so it's an older generator. So it died Sunday morning at like 3 a.m. So our facilities people went out and literally just bought a fleet of portable generators from the nearby Lowe's and hooked up critical systems to those where they could. But yeah, so this is something that's currently very much on my mind. Like, because we're in a basement, the refrigerator space, so it maintains its temperature for it could go for up to a week without actual power to refrigerate it. But yeah, it's like long term, how can you maintain like a 5,000 square foot refrigerated space on very limited power? So yeah, that's something. So I'm very curious too, because they have there are freezers on campus that are tied into a central system and monitored, but our refrigerated space has historically not been. So I'll probably ping the curators list about what kind of systems you all use and all of that, just to get an idea to pass on to our campus engineers. So thanks.
Yeah, it was really interesting that when this was going on, and we realized that actually the freezers were priority for getting power if the whole site went down, but the refrigerated space is not, because it's just far too large. So they would prioritize freezers after IT, and we were really far down the list because it was just too expensive and too difficult to do. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that ever happened.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'm going to be talking more with our facilities folks because we have an auto dialer that calls me, but when I'm away, so every time something happens with power, whether it was in the in the county of San Diego, one time I was up in San Francisco, this time I was, in a national park, but it just keeps calling me ad nauseum. So it just fills my, inbox and it doesn't stop calling me. So the solution was to just cut off the auto dialer. So now, it wasn't calling anybody. So we're going to have to come up with a way to more streamline. So it can call me, but then also alert somebody else as well that can actually do something if they're there. So I will be following up on that. I'll hopefully have more positive stuff to report next year. So.
Oh, I did have one question for you, Susie, because with this power stuff, right? Supposedly the power is coming back this afternoon. And I emailed the Cox people, but I was curious about the iTrax UPS. Did it have any issues after this? Because that's the one.
We were
okay.
Yeah, we did really well with that. We have quite an old UPS, and we were worried about the amount of time it could last in backup. Because there is, as I say, these rolling kind of stops and starts to the power, and it managed to keep going for nearly an hour, which was quite good. But then, as I say, we went back on site and specifically powered it down because we were worried that they were going to do longer down times of the power to then do a proper fix. So yeah, that was something that we were very concerned about, but it did okay. So yeah, it did really well as it flitted, because we had surges as well as power outage. And even though, I mean, ours was, I think, fitted in 2013, so it's not particularly good, but it has highlighted that we really potentially would want to fit more of these to some of the other more expensive instrumentation that we have.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any final comments?
Okay, one final. So I'm the facility guy as well as the curator. So I think one of the things that I have found out is that there's a lot of parts to the electrical system, and a lot of them are, it seems like over the past couple of years, harder and harder to get certain parts in a timely fashion. So, you may not, you may be talking to the facility folks and it may not be completely registering with them on how important some of the things you have are. But it's always worth that follow-up, because we're finding like the parts that we have for our backup generator, they're 6 to 8 months out. So we are constantly ordering spares to have in our queue, even if we know we'll never use them. So you're going to spend a lot more money having those things and as that insurance policy. So just something I've come across.
Yep, and and on the UPSs, they have a set shelf life, which is something. Ours got zapped, and somehow our old 2009 Avitech XREP is okay and still functioning as much as it can. So yeah, that's something to think about too, is checking in on all those UPSs and putting on your calendar and replacing them even if they're still functioning. So yeah, and yeah, the shipment times are just taking forever. So that's great. Thanks, Kurt. It's good info. One more thing to add to our list. Okay, so we're doing great on time, I think. So Michelle, do you want me to throw it back to you to talk about hazardous samples?
Yeah, sure. I don't have much to show. I have one slide with some maybe discussion questions. At this point, I feel like I could talk for a long time about like all of my ideas about asbestos core handling. But I just wanted to put it out there to this community, is hazardous core material a concern? It sounds like, Susie, that you guys have some concerns, but it's maybe more like agricultural concerns versus human health, or is it human health as well?
No, it's definitely human health as well, because it's biological hazards that they think they're thinking about spores and things like that. So yeah, we have to suit up, not quite as extreme as your scenario, but it's kind of similar, that there's a lot of protocols in place. And but the other side of it is, interestingly, it becomes really expensive. It's very expensive to handle these materials because all of we wear like your similar suits that need to go for clinical like biohazard disposal routes, and it's like something like 5 times more expensive to get rid of that material than just normal waste. So yeah, there's lots of things that we've been looking at, and from a sustainability point of view, it's a huge amount of extra waste that we produce when we handle these materials. So yeah, I am intrigued by how you're going to handle it for sure.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that we just a few weeks ago, I guess, or maybe a month ago, were made aware of the slight radioactive element of manganese nodules. So their dust is they emit alpha particles, and the problem is in the dust because the manganese is constantly flaking and dusty. And if you inhale that, that's a huge problem. So we had to put all of ours that we have on display, we put them behind plexiglass boxes, which is enough because they're so low emitting. But if you're handling them a lot, it can be a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think dust is probably a big concern that's been generally overlooked. So I know something that we've been having lots of discussions in our building here, and one thing that's been brought up is at the end of June, the U.S. Department of Labor put out some big updates about silica dust, mostly related to miners. But I mean, I'm sure we all have silicious oozes in our repositories that we work with all the time, and there's lots of dust that comes off of that. So, we've been thinking, like, is this something we need to put in procedures of having folks wearing masks while sampling and stuff like that? But what's sustainable and what's not is a big question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a lot of still the majority of our collection is dry sediments. They're not refrigerated. And we do have quite a number of diatom oozes just sitting there. And when people do want to sample them, it's always they have to be very careful because those oozes absorb humidity and they kind of puff up out of the trays that they're in because they're in open trays in our storage facility. So yeah, so that's been an ongoing issue, not more from a sample preservation standpoint than a health one, but yeah, the health issue is still there. And I have to point out to people, even visitors to the labs, like, don't touch this, like, basically.
The other thing that we dealt with last month was a student came to iTrack some samples that were from a nuclear site. So they also had to be kept dampened down in a similar way. And we were concerned that we didn't know enough about it, that they were then prepped in a different lab, and they were all prepped with XRF film and like double containerized prior to bringing them to our facility. And we made them do all the prep, as I say, in a different lab. And it's kind of like the similar kind of scenario as you, Michelle, that like it was a kind of specialist lab where all that prep work was done. And then we took them when they were kind of sealed. But we're looking to do a kind of similar thing to you, where for basically these terrestrial samples, we're not allowed to use our normal core splitter on, so we don't split them at the moment. Basically the specialist who comes and advises for us has said that we need to basically contain it in probably a Perspex box or something like that. But we think, one, it's going to be expensive, and two, how safe is it to split cores when you can't actually touch the cores? And we haven't really come across a a good solution yet to really manage that. But it's something that we're really being pressurized to do by facility users. They think we should be providing this type of service, and at the moment we're not. So it'd be interesting to see how your glove box core splitter or whatever you design kind of works out.
Yeah, we're actually going to be testing our core splitter with some cement cores on Monday. So hoping that goes well. But we'll have lots of videos and photos and we're going to document the whole process. I'm hoping to, compile it all and maybe some sort of tech note type document to share amongst the community when it's done. At the moment, we're planning on splitting the cores outside and doing some air monitoring. I don't know if we'll actually detect much dust since we would be outside, but we would at least have some results from that, and we'll do some air monitoring while we're cutting the samples as well and working with them dry. So at least maybe there's a baseline that can be used in the community on what the amount of dust produced from cutting. It would be hard rock like gabbro and serpentinite cores, but it could probably translate into how much dust is produced when working with sediment to a degree.
Yeah, at least it would provide some information that we could work from.
All right.
It'd be amazing.
BGS, I was just going to say BGS, we cut a lot of sandstones, granites and rocks with quite high silica content. So we cut most of them wet with ordinary diamond saws, and we have really good dust extraction, and we monitor on a fairly regular basis dust levels. We have dust extractors in various places around the facility. And if one of our technicians is working with core and it's generating any significant dust, we certainly have mobile dust extractors that we can put around to mop up any dust that's coming off. So we take it fairly seriously. I have to say that what we've been apprehensive and watching is it was a whole series of EU regulations on rocks that might have traces of asbestos, and particularly white asbestos. And we noticed that the Health and Safety Authority, Health and Safety were the official body, were a little bit skeptical, I think, as to at what level the regulations needed to be introduced in the UK, because there didn't appear to be, when they studied, for example, Cornish workers of serpentine, there was no epidemiological evidence that it was a serious hazard. But that was something that was certainly being looked at seriously in the UK, probably about 6 or 7 years ago now.
So Mike, with your air monitoring when cutting a lot of the sandstones, are you finding a lot of dust is generated even with wet soils?
Well, the answer is we normally use masks. We use visors and normally just fairly heavy waterproof clothing, as it were, leather aprons and so forth. But the dust extraction is very powerful. So we rely basically on the power of the dust extraction.
I would love to see some photos of your setup with the dust extraction.
Yeah, I can. Well, if I get a set and send them to Alex, is that the best? She can probably share them around.
Sure, that's fine. I'm happy to do that. That'd be great.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great. We don't have, depending on the material, we have a ton of manganese nodules, and we generally don't wear PPE beyond gloves for those, to be quite honest. So one thing I think that may be great, and maybe we can just do this through the listserv, is start making a list of hazardous materials that are common to collections, especially for, new collections managers who may not know this. The other thing is I don't know, I think people are a lot more concerned about, I don't know, any kind of interaction with hazardous materials now. I feel like when I first came in, nobody was using any kind of PPE. So sometimes bad practices are propagated and just because folks don't know. So that would be something I think that would be really, really helpful. So I was just looking in the chat. It looks like Nicole has answered Val's questions. Val asked, what kind of extractors do you have for splitting cores? Not just for dust, but fumes from the liner of marine sediment cores. So,
Yeah, that was a concern. My lab tech who does most of the core splitting. We always have we have it's in a back area where there's like a garage door to open. So we always do it with the door open, but you can still smell the melting plastic very strongly. So we actually had environmental health and safety come in and they monitor it for like an hour at different areas around where the splitting was happening. And it was all well below safety hazard levels, right? It didn't warrant like a personal respirator or anything, but yeah, we have our on-site machine shop looking into how, some sort of vacuum system to just suck more of the fumes out of there, and how to rig that into the existing core splitter.
okay, great. Yeah. We had that issue as well, and we didn't get it tested. We just moved the core splitter outside. So now for us, you guys, a bunch of you saw our space last year. We just have our splitter on dollies and we moved that outside. So, the risk is down, and our rock building is so large, but still, even having open airflow, it doesn't stop all of that material from going into your nose or mouth and into your lungs. So yeah. Let's see, we are about 2 minutes till 1 o'clock, at least Pacific time. I want to honor everybody's time. So are there any last comments, questions? Please feel free. I'm going to send out an email with the notes and the recording. So if anybody wants to send me stuff, I may wait till tomorrow to do that. But please feel free to just keep emailing with questions or whatnot, if anything that comes up later. So yeah, any final comments, questions? Everybody seems pretty good. Well, thank you all so much. I don't think we've ever been so timely for a meeting, so that was amazing. So with that, I think Brady, do you have any comments for planning next year? Not like you have to, but I figure if you're here.
We've been talking about it. We don't have too much planned yet. I may send out a few kind of surveys about, just topics people want to cover, timing that works better for folks. I think we're targeting summertime, which we'll see what spaces are available when, and that may dictate some of when we have it. But yeah, so we'll send out a few surveys probably in the coming months, just so people can mark their calendar and that sort of thing. But if anybody has any suggestions, certainly for like special topics they want to spend some time on, we can certainly throw those in the agenda. I know one of the things at the last meeting we talked a little bit about, and I've talked a bit with Dustin, who's our data architect, is whether we want to try and have any sort of structured meeting for some of the people that do that sort of support of databases or other sort of the back end kind of things that aren't the curator staff, but that do a lot of that support from a tech end, if we want to try and have any sort of special session where we can loop some of those people in to talk to one another and that sort of thing. So those are kind of the interest survey sort of things we'll send out, and then we can move forward with planning from there.
Okay, perfect. That sounds great. And I can, I do have a list of I can send you an email with the list of what we discussed in our kind of wrap up session last year too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
This meeting. Yeah. So I'll do that all fine.
Excellent. And I'll probably pester you about some planning details too. So
please do. That's what I did with Nicole. So yeah, there's no set model for all of this. So I'm happy to help in any way.
That's a nice little chain we'll have going there.
Yeah, that's great. I'll loop you in too, Nicole.
Yeah, no, it's good. It was really helpful. Yeah. So thank you, Nicole. I'm happy to help moving forward. So
excellent. Cool.
Okay, well, if anybody else is, if everybody else is good with questions or comments, then I think I'll go ahead and wrap up this meeting and just get really excited to see you all in person next year. So if I could mail you all a beer or a glass of wine, I would.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Thanks.
Thank you guys. Your response was awesome, and the support to have this all happen. You guys came up with the topic, so thank you all. You really made this all happen. So Awesome. See you guys next year.
Everybody,
Bye.
thank you.
Okay, bye.